In Hollywood, fame can be bought, but no one can buy back a pair of lungs or the final heartbeat of a human heart. Throughout the Golden Age, the film capital cast a cruel illusion over the world that leading men like Steve McQueen or Humphrey Bogart were immortal beings endowed with endless strength and eternal masculinity. But when the spotlight faded, reality emerged as a bare, unforgiving nightmare. Behind the charming smiles were bodies drained to the point of decay, breaths broken by cancer, and lonely deaths met with quiet denial from the very industry that created them. We continue to celebrate these men as legends, yet rarely acknowledge how Hollywood silently consumed their flesh and blood in exchange for timeless images on screen. From concealed terminal illnesses to brutal medical complications, the deaths of the seven icons below were not merely the end of individual lives. They were alarms exposing the true cost of fame and glory. Let us begin with the man once known as the King of Cool, a figure who never surrendered to speed but ultimately collapsed under the weight of his own breath, Steve McQueen. Don't miss these shocking hidden chapters of Hollywood history. Subscribe now and join us as we strip away the truth behind the glamour. 1. Steve McQueen, the speed legend who could not outrun a slow, relentless killer. "I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of not being able to breathe." Those words did not come from a weak man. They came from Steve McQueen, the man once seen as the embodiment of indestructible masculinity. On screen, he was the King of Cool, a figure who drove race cars at tearing speeds and stared danger down without blinking. But in the final chapter of his life, McQueen found himself trapped in a race with only one finish line death. It began with a dry cough on the set of The Hunter in 1979. At first, McQueen dismissed it as the result of heavy smoking or dust from action scenes. The truth was far more brutal. Doctors diagnosed him with mesothelioma, a rare and deadly cancer of the lung lining caused by asbestos exposure. The lethal fibers had not come from a single accident. They had been silently embedded in his chest for decades, dating back to his service in the U.S. Navy and his years wearing fireproof racing suits. When he received what was essentially a death sentence, the instincts of the Great Escape resurfaced. McQueen refused to lie down and wait to die. He launched a desperate, frantic, and bloody fight for survival. Mainstream American medicine refused treatment, declaring the cancer too advanced. Unwilling to surrender, McQueen made one final escape, fleeing to Mexico. In a small clinic in Rosarito, he poured his entire fortune and hope into alternative treatments, widely dismissed as quackery. There, his battle became a cycle of physical torment. He was injected with compounds derived from animal cells, forced to swallow hundreds of supplements daily, and subjected to relentless colon cleanses. Hollywood glory was now a distant memory. In its place stood a brutal reality, a man once built like steel, reduced to a moving skeleton. The angular face that had captivated millions became hollow. The fire in his eyes faded into pure exhaustion. Every breath became a struggle. His lungs no longer expanded freely. They were slowly turning to stone, literally. The most painful part was not dying, but knowing he was dying slowly while his mind remained fully aware. Some nights McQueen woke delirious in agony. He tried to get out of bed, trembling hands gripping a chair as if it were the steering wheel of his Porsche 911. He longed for a deep breath, for air untainted by hospitals. Instead, he coughed up blood. The tragedy peaked in November 1980. Against medical advice, McQueen chose one final surgery to remove massive abdominal tumors. He told his family he wanted to be clean before he died. His body was too exhausted. The heart that once powered through the world's most dangerous racetracks could not survive the shock. He died quietly alone among cold medical machines, far removed from flashing cameras. McQueen's death was not merely the end of a life. It was the collapse of the illusion that strength and wealth can conquer everything. Hollywood had drained him, turned him into a profit engine, and abandoned him when that machine broke. His final message was bitter. We may conquer speed, but we will never defeat mortality if we chase illusions while neglecting ourselves. McQueen died roaring with willpower, but at least he died as himself. For the next man, death was not only physical suffering but a battle for identity. That man was Rock Hudson, who paid with his life to hide a devastating secret behind the smile of a Hollywood god. 2. Rock Hudson, when Hollywood's leading man died slowly in silence. In July 1985, a privately chartered Boeing 747 from Paris touched down in Los Angeles under unprecedented security. On a stretcher lay a man so emaciated he was barely recognizable. The face once hailed as the gold standard of masculine beauty had collapsed into hollow eyes and darkened skin. Hollywood held its breath. The media erupted. That man was Rock Hudson, the embodiment of America's romantic dreams, carrying a secret powerful enough to shake the foundations of an entire film empire. Before the nightmare began, Rock Hudson was everything American women desired: tall, elegant, and armed with a smile capable of melting the screen. But one morning in June 1984, while preparing for his role in the hit series, Dynasty, Hudson looked into the mirror and noticed a small lesion on his neck. It was not a bruise. It was Kaposi's sarcoma, the unmistakable marker of the century's most feared disease, AIDS. At that time, AIDS was not merely an illness. It was a moral death sentence met with extreme fear and social rejection. For an A-list star whose career depended on projecting heterosexual romantic perfection, the diagnosis was equivalent to professional suicide. Hudson realized in horror that if the truth emerged, not only his fame, but his entire existence would be erased from Hollywood history. Rock Hudson began living a painful double life. He continued to appear on set, continued to smile for cameras, but every time the makeup came off, he faced the reality of death gnawing at his body. To conceal his rapid weight loss, he wore multiple layers beneath tailored suits. To explain his gaunt appearance, he told the press he was suffering from diet-related anemia. The cruelest irony unfolded during an iconic Dynasty scene when Hudson had to share a kiss with actress Linda Evans. Behind the romantic moment adored by millions lay a heart clenched with terror. Hudson rinsed his mouth with disinfectant dozens of times before and after filming, not out of fear of infecting his co-star, but out of disgust for the toxic silence he was forced to carry. He lived in absolute isolation, afraid to form relationships, afraid to visit major hospitals for fear his medical records would leak. Hudson's health deteriorated at a horrifying pace. His immune system collapsed completely, turning ordinary colds into life-threatening pneumonia. When he appeared on the television show of his close friend, Doris Day, in 1985, the world was stunned. The once 6'4" giant now trembled, spoke in a faint voice, and could barely stand. By then, concealment was impossible. Hudson flew to France in search of HPA-23, an experimental drug not approved in the United States. There alone in a Paris hotel room, he collapsed entirely. When French doctors refused treatment due to his advanced condition, Hudson made a historic decision: he would tell the truth. On July 25, 1985, the announcement was released: Rock Hudson has AIDS. Hollywood convulsed. Those who once celebrated him turned away in fear. Old friends avoided him. Studios shut down every project connected to his name. The star, once pursued by millions, was flown back to America aboard a specialized medical aircraft, treated like a contaminated object. Rock Hudson spent his final months at his Beverly Hills estate, known as the Castle. It was no longer a king's palace, but a lonely fortress. He lay in bed facing the Pacific Ocean, his body ravaged by tumors and relentless fevers. His memory began to fade, but the pain of Hollywood's betrayal remained sharp. He died on October 2, 1985, just weeks before his 60th birthday. His death was not only an artistic loss, it reshaped American society. For the first time, the public realized that the invisible disease spared no one, not even the powerful. Rock Hudson's passing exposed Hollywood's true face, an industry that celebrates you when you are beautiful, then casts you into darkness when you no longer fit its dream. Hudson died twice, once from illness, and once from the cold abandonment of fame. His death ushered in a new era of medical awareness, but at the cost of a leading man's life. Yet if Hudson's tragedy was silence, then for another icon, the Iron Man of American cinema death would be a prolonged public torture. That man was Humphrey Bogart, the toughest face on screen, brought down by a habit Hollywood itself encouraged. 3. Humphrey Bogart, the hard man who wasted away under the spotlight. If there is one face that defines American cinematic grit and resolve, it is Humphrey Bogart. With a cigarette perpetually burning on his lips and a glass of hard liquor in hand, he built the image of the unbreakable Man of Steel through classics like Casablanca and The Maltese Falcon. But that rugged image was in truth a contract signed with death itself. In 1956, at the height of his career, Bogart began experiencing a strange burning pain in his throat. Every swallow felt like shards of broken glass tearing downward. A man who worshipped toughness, Bogart ignored the symptoms for months. He dismissed them as smoker's cough. But when blood began to accompany the coughing and his weight plummeted uncontrollably, the truth could no longer be denied: he was suffering from terminal esophageal cancer. Hollywood watched in shock as its toughest man entered a massive surgery that lasted more than 8 hours. Doctors removed his esophagus and part of his ribcage in an attempt to stop the cancer from spreading. Technically, the operation was a success, but it turned a living legend into a literal ghost. When Bogart returned from the hospital, he weighed less than 40 kilograms. The face that once radiated authority was now so gaunt, it looked like skin stretched over bone. For an actor, the cruelest loss is the voice, and Bogart had lost his trademark gravelly tone. He could only whisper short sentences through waves of chest pain and tightening spasms. The final months of Bogart's life were a second-by-second torture. He could no longer eat normally and had to receive nourishment through feeding tubes. To preserve the last remnants of dignity, whenever friends like Lauren Bacall or Frank Sinatra came to visit, he insisted on sitting in his favorite armchair, wrapped in a thick blanket to hide the body that was slowly rotting away. He did not want the world to see him weak. Even when the pain reached unbearable levels, Bogart forced a faint smile onto his lips. But behind closed doors, the truth was far uglier. He battled relentless vomiting and psychological collapse, knowing he was dying while his films were still playing in theaters. On January 14, 1957, the tough guy finally took his last breath in deep sleep after days sustained by morphine and haunted by delirium. Hollywood preserved the image of an immortal Bogart on film, but discarded the flesh-and-blood man after draining every ounce of his strength for smoke-filled frames. Bogart's death proved that Hollywood can manufacture heroes who never feel pain, but in real life, no one is invincible. And when speaking of fallen heroes, there is another king we cannot ignore, one who used his final breath to leave behind a devastating warning for humanity. That man was Yul Brynner, a figure of commanding authority whose lungs were quietly disintegrating day by day beneath clouds of white smoke. 4. Yul Brynner. Glory could not save a pair of rotting lungs. Now that I am gone, I want to say just one thing to you. Don't smoke. Whatever you do, don't smoke. These were not lines from a film, but the chilling last words of Yul Brynner, broadcast across the United States just days after his death. The image of a powerful king with his iconic shaved head, now reduced to a gaunt face and sunken eyes staring directly into the camera to warn future generations, became one of the most haunting moments in television history. Hollywood created an invincible king on screen, but reality reduced him to a wreck in a losing war against cigarette smoke. Yul Brynner, famous for portraying King Mongkut in The King, and I was a symbol of overwhelming strength and supreme authority. He possessed a powerful physique and a commanding presence that made people believe nothing could ever bring this king down. Yet behind that formidable exterior was a destructive habit. Brynner smoked up to 5 packs of cigarettes a day for decades. For him, smoking was not merely a habit, it was part of the glamorous lifestyle Hollywood relentlessly glorified. The tragedy began in September 1983 while Brynner was touring to commemorate The King and I. After one performance, he felt his chest tightening violently, every breath carrying the metallic taste of blood. Medical tests struck like lightning: terminal lung cancer with metastasis. The tumor was not confined, it had begun to rot inside his chest, destroying alveoli and blood vessels alike. The peak of agony came when Brynner refused to leave the stage. He made a choice that was both heroic and reckless to continue performing while his lungs were falling apart. Some nights audiences still saw a majestic king on stage, but the moment the curtain closed, he collapsed backstage. Assistants rushed oxygen tanks to keep him alive. Each step across the stage felt like walking with lead weights, and every powerful line delivered was a desperate effort to mask the wheezing gasp of lungs that no longer worked. By 1985, when the cancer spread to his spinal cord and other organs, the pain became unbearable. Physical torment attacked him minute by minute, forcing even a man who prized dignity like Brynner to writhe in despair. His appearance became unrecognizable, muscle vanished, skin turned pale, and each breath became a weak, rattling sound. In his final days at a New York hospital, Brynner fully understood that death was imminent. Instead of hiding like many stars, he chose to confront it. He asked to record a short video as a warning to humanity. In that footage, there was no powerful king, only a dying soul, using his last strength to atone for past mistakes. He had spent a lifetime crafting the image of an immortal man, only to use his own death to expose the fragile truth of human existence. Yul Brynner died on October 10, 1985, the same day as his romantic counterpart, Rock Hudson. Hollywood lost a king, but the world gained a brutal lesson about the destruction caused by habits that fame encourages. His death stands as a reminder no amount of power or celebrity can save a body destroyed from within by its own owner. And if Yul Brynner represents a king destroyed by habit, the next figure proves something even harsher. Even the body of a professional athlete is no match for Hollywood's ability to drain and consume everything it touches. That man was Chuck Connors, the legendary gunslinger who paid for his strength with a breath that never returned. 5. Chuck Connors, when an athlete's body could no longer save him. Death didn't come from a bullet on set, it came from ignoring the limits of my own flesh. Chuck Connors was not an ordinary actor, he was a physical phenomenon. Before becoming the breakout star of The Rifleman, Connors had been a professional athlete who played in both of America's major leagues, the MLB in baseball and the NBA in basketball. Standing nearly 6'6" with a massive wingspan, he was regarded as a symbol of raw, unbreakable strength. Yet that very label of the Iron Man became a fatal trap once he entered the relentless machinery of Hollywood. During his peak years, Connors worked like a machine. Grueling shooting schedules, physically punishing action scenes, and constant cigarette smoking to relieve stress slowly eroded the finely tuned athlete's body. Hollywood demanded that he remain strong, always ready to shoulder a rifle. And Connors complied by ignoring every warning sign his body sent. He believed his athletic foundation would carry him through anything until shortness of breath began forcing him to collapse in the middle of filming. Lung cancer struck Connors mercilessly in the early 1990s. For a man who once sprinted across professional fields, being unable to walk from his bed to the window was the ultimate humiliation. His final days unfolded as a prolonged tragedy at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. Breathing something he once took for granted became a luxury. Every inhale sent violent tremors of pain through his chest, his lungs so damaged they could no longer properly exchange oxygen. The peak of his suffering came when Connors made one last attempt to maintain his tough public image. Though his body was completely depleted, he forced a smile and spoke of future projects. But behind the lights, he was a gaunt man, fighting for every breath with the help of machines. On November 10, 1992, The Rifleman finally let go in total exhaustion. A once magnificent athlete's body had been crushed by the non-stop grind of the entertainment industry and years of destructive habits. Chuck Connors' death proved that no matter how strong your starting point is, if you fail to respect and listen to your body, fame will burn you alive. And if Connors was a giant felled by lung disease, the next figure offers an even crueler lesson. Surviving catastrophe only to live on in a permanently broken body. That man was Clint Walker, the giant of Cheyenne who survived death itself, but never truly returned. 6. Clint Walker, the giant who never reclaimed his prime. Sometimes surviving death is harder than actually dying. Clint Walker was once described as a living sculpture of Hollywood, boasting the broadest shoulders and most massive chest on American television during the 1950s. He was not merely an actor, but a physical ideal, admired by millions of young men. Fate, however, subjected this giant to a series of brutal medical trials that turned his life into a prolonged indictment of human fragility. The first nightmare struck when Walker was diagnosed with malignant skin cancer, the result of endless days filming under scorching sun without protection. Though surgery succeeded, it triggered a chain reaction of collapse. Soon after, during a skiing accident, a ski pole pierced his chest and struck his heart. Walker was pronounced dead at the scene, only to be miraculously revived by doctors. But the price of that miracle was a body that would never fully recover. The years that followed became a painful journey of slow survival. Complications from the heart injury led to severe cardiovascular problems. The man who once lifted massive rocks on film sets now faced sudden heart failure episodes. His giant frame became a burden on a weakening heart. Walker could no longer perform action roles and was pushed aside by Hollywood once he lost the image of invincibility. Walker's suffering was not only physical, but deeply psychological. He watched his legendary muscles soften with time, his breath shorten, and nightly chest pains become constant companions. He outlived many of his peers, but those extra decades were spent inside a deeply damaged body, a prolonged existence defined by pain rather than glory. When he passed away in 2018 from congestive heart failure, the world finally understood the suffering this giant had endured. He had spent half of his life paying for fleeting moments of glory. Walker's story is a stark reminder that recovery from illness does not mean returning to who you once were. Sometimes it is merely the beginning of a longer, quieter war. If Clint Walker's life was a battle that dragged on into old age, then the final figure on our list represents one of the most shocking tragedies of all, a large, gentle man who was gone after what was supposed to be the simplest surgery imaginable. That man was Dan Blocker, the beloved giant of Bonanza, who died from a medical risk no one saw coming. 7. Dan Blocker. One surgery was enough to end everything. Don't worry, this big guy is just going in for a quick tune-up and will be running fine again. Those were Dan Blocker's last light-hearted words to friends before entering the hospital in May 1972. To the American public, Dan Blocker was not just an actor. He was Eric Haas Cartwright, the second son of the Ponderosa Ranch in the legendary series Bonanza. Standing 6'4" and weighing over 285 pounds, Blocker embodied solidity itself, a mountain of muscle paired with unmistakable warmth and kindness. No one believed a man like this could fall. Yet Hollywood's medical history would record one of its most stunning moments, a man built like a mountain collapsing from what should have been a routine incision. Dan Blocker's death did not begin with a long-wasting illness like Steve McQueen's or Yul Brynner's. It began with one of the most common medical conditions imaginable, gallbladder inflammation. At just 43 years old, Blocker was at the peak of his career, the heart of the most successful television series in America for more than a decade. When doctors recommended gallbladder removal surgery, no one questioned the outcome. The production team even scheduled filming for the next episode immediately after his expected discharge. But the tragedy of giants often lies in their very size. The circulatory system of a man with an oversized body is always under extreme strain, especially after surgeries requiring deep anesthesia. Shortly after the operation ended, while Blocker lay in recovery with every expectation of returning to set, a silent killer formed inside his bloodstream. A blood clot broke free, traveled against the current, and slammed into his lungs, causing an acute pulmonary embolism. The climax of cruelty unfolded in just minutes. A man who could knock down 3 opponents on screen with a single punch now writhed in total oxygen deprivation. His lungs ceased to function, and the great heart that once beat for millions of viewers descended into chaotic failure. Doctors exhausted every resuscitation method, but the massive body could not withstand the sudden shock. Dan Blocker died only hours after the simple surgery had been completed. His death struck Hollywood like a high-voltage shock. It was not merely the loss of a talent, it was the collapse of an illusion. People had believed that men as strong and healthy as Blocker were immune to ordinary risks. His passing was so sudden that the writers of Bonanza were left helpless. For the first time in television history, they were forced to write out a main character without explanation, because audiences simply could not accept any reason for the disappearance of the giant. Behind the warm glow of the Cartwright family lay a cold reality. Hollywood had grown dangerously complacent about the health of its golden geese. Dan Blocker's death delivered a brutal message about medical risk, that in an operating room there is no distinction between a superstar and an ordinary man. Sometimes the price of fame is not slow erosion over time, but a single careless moment of fate born from humanity's overconfidence in its own invincibility. 7 legends, 7 brilliant lives, all ending in a mournful symphony of physical collapse. Hollywood built dreams of immortality, yet quietly consumed the people behind them. They did not die to applause, but in hospital shadows and the loneliness of prolonged pain. Their stories are a hard reminder. Stage lights may illuminate your name, but only health allows you to truly exist. Thank you for joining us in uncovering the tragic hidden corners of Golden Age legends. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next shocking truths of the film world. And you, whose passing haunted you the most on this list, leave your thoughts in the comments so we can discuss together.